Hey, welcome to the eDrum Workshop. I'm Luke and I hope you're having a great day. If you enjoy anything to do with electronic or hybrid drums, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss any eDrum related news, reviews or discussions. So that clip you just saw at the beginning, I posted it to my Facebook and Instagram accounts with a challenge to anybody who watched it. Identify which of those two audio clips is from the Pearl Mimic Pro and which one is the true recording of the acoustic kit that you can see on the video. Is number 1 the acoustic kit or is it number 2? I'm going to reveal the answer in this video and I'm also going to A-B compare the two kits directly. I'm going to play each drum individually, as part of a groove and then also as part of a song. So that's all coming up shortly, but there's a few things of note that I thought were quite interesting from this little experiment. So I gathered it'd be fun to chat about that first. And if you hadn't heard the clip before now, why not try and work it out yourself as we go? So initially I was quite worried that it was going to be too easy to tell which one was which. But if we have a look at some of the responses, I guess I was worried about nothing. It turns out that no one could agree on which recording came from which source. Some people asserted that Slate Drums are clearly number 2, others that it was blatantly number 1. There were some replies with very solid logic behind them, talking about the room size versus the sound, the way that there's a lack of detail in the cymbal sounds in one or the other. Heck, some people were even trying to call my alleged bluff by maintaining that both of these clips were actually from the Mimic. I can assure you that there's no trick question here, it's all just the one premise. One of the audio clips is definitely the kit that you see in the video, and the other one definitely comes from inside the Pearl Mimic Pro. Even Steven Slate himself got involved. He said that he thought that it was great, so thanks Steven. But what this little experiment revealed to me was very interesting and it confirmed some things that I've been thinking about for a while regarding electronic drums. Sound is so subjective that lots of little things can colour what you're hearing. Your playback device might make it sound different. Your own ears can be changing your perception. If you have any form of hearing loss, for example, the cymbals might sound completely different. And even your own presumptions about what you think you should be hearing can change your perception too. The ride cymbal was described in one clip as sounding far too much like a crash, so clearly it must have been the Mimic samples. And I think this all kind of relates to a lot of people's perceptions about electronic drums. I hear a lot of people complaining about how modules can sound inauthentic, or they're not acoustic enough, or that they can hear machine gunning, whilst another person will tell you that that exact same module definitely doesn't machine gun, or that the other person has clearly never heard an acoustic kit before because this is the pinnacle of authenticity. And I've always found it interesting that the sounds that we're expecting to hear often aren't actually real representations of acoustic drums. A module like the ATV AD5 to some people still doesn't sound natural. Yet others will swear blind that it sounds like you sat directly at the kit. And some people will attest that a very clearly processed sounding electronic drum sound is exactly what the kit that they owned when they were younger sounded like. The memory of which will most likely have been distorted by different recordings and nostalgia. And then of course some of these issues do genuinely exist inside drum modules. A lot of them haven't nailed that acoustic-like sound yet, and many of them do really sound machine gunny. So of course doing this experiment with a Pearl Mimic Pro is always going to be a little harder to differentiate because of the quality of the samples that are inside it, but I still felt like it was a worthwhile thing to do. But there's a lot of things attached to these sounds that we often don't consider, and maybe sometimes those issues that we think we can hear are actually a manifestation of our preconceptions going in. Okay, so I don't really want to spend the whole video talking about that subject. I just thought it was an interesting takeaway from all the comments that I've been reading, and a pretty decent setup for this video. I've also challenged myself in the last few weeks to recreate my acoustic kit inside the Pearl Mimic Pro. And what I've found from playing both of these kits is that you can make them sound pretty similar if you know what you're doing. I could pretty heavily process my acoustic kit and make it sound quite like Slate Drums. Or I could strip back quite a lot of the microphone setup and the processing from the Slate samples and rough it up a little bit with the EQ to make it sound closer to an acoustic drum kit. Or at least a very basic recording of an acoustic drum kit. And that's what I did here. I took out the bulk of the room mics, the kick-out mic and the direct hi-hat and ride microphones from the Mimic Pro to make it closer to the acoustic kit recording that I've made, because this setup was much more limited than what Slate used to sample their own drums. Then I also EQ'd these samples to make them sound a little bit rough around the edges. So, which audio clip was which? Let's hear it one more time, but I'll put in the correct footage. So yeah, clip number 1 was the Mimic Pro, And clip number 2 is a Tama Superstar Hyperdrive with a pork pie snare and Amedia cymbals. Let's hear these examples. Of course, they're not going to sound identical. It was very difficult to match how the snare and cymbals sounded specifically. I did a lot of tweaking to the snare layers to try and get it as close to the actual sound of the drum and the way that we recorded it as possible, and even used a different snare layer for the rim shot and a completely different snare's cross-stick sound. Trying to match those snare overtones wasn't really possible either, and part of that is definitely down to the fact that I'm just not that great at tuning. There's a large amount of tom resonance as well every time I hit the kick drum. There was no way to replicate this with the clean slate samples. As for the cymbals, I just had to try and get as close as I could and go from there. The Amedia cymbals that I'm using are pretty unique, and there wasn't really anything that sounded quite like them inside the Mimic. Some of you might have actually picked up on the fact that I've changed the ride cymbal sound since that original clip too. And the reason for that is that actually putting a crash on the edge of the ride was closer to my acoustic ride. As was noted on the Facebook post, my ride cymbal is quite crashy, and I actually chose it for that reason. I'm going to post a tutorial video in the future to show you exactly how I accomplished this, and how you too can also use those same methods to either match your own acoustic kit, or even kits from recordings that you like. So be sure to check that out when it lands. Also, bear in mind that I've not processed the acoustic kit in any way at all. There's no compression, no EQ, nothing. This is all direct from source audio, and I've just mixed the levels appropriately. I'm thinking of also doing a fully processed version of this video too, so if you're interested in that, let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know your thoughts on each of the kits in the comments too. I'd love to hear which kit you preferred, or even which specific drums you liked, and if you think there's any improvements down the line that I could make if I did this again, be sure to let me know those too. I'm going to walk through the kit now and the microphone setup that we used, to give you a feel for how we recorded it and what the limitations were. Then I'm going to walk through the components of my electronic kit, and finally, I'm going to play you out with a song. So I spent a couple of days down at a friend's studio, Jaeger Music and Art Studio in Chorley. There'll be a link in the description to their site and socials for anybody in the Northwest who might want any studio work doing or vocal or instrument lessons. The shells here aren't actually mine, it's the studio shells, but it's the same kit as my own gigging kit. It's a Tama Superstar Hyperdrive, but they also have a 14-inch floor tom that I don't, so I wanted to make use of that. So it's 12, 14 and 16-inch toms, and I've put Evans G2 heads on them, and a 22-inch kick drum with an Evans EMAD head and Evans EQ patches. There's also some pillows inside. This is how it was already set up for teaching, but I was fine with the sound for this purpose, so I stuck with it. Then I brought along my own pork pie 13x7 snare. I've got an Aquarian high energy head on, which is my go-to snare head for this drum, my ridiculous remote Speedy Hat hi-hat setup, a Tama Speed Cobra double bass pedal, and my lovely Amedia cymbals. These are the 13-inch Dervish hats, 17-inch Galata crash, a 20-inch Kommagene ride, and a 15-inch Galata China cymbal. I'll leave a link in the description to a video where I talked through my acoustic kit choices if you want to know any more about these cymbals. Personally, I love them and I picked them all for very specific reasons. We're in a pretty small room and we didn't have a huge array of mics to choose from, so we went with an SM57 on the snare top and bottom, an AKG D12VR on the kick, the Sennheiser E604 tom mics on each tom, and we've got two Rosewood Mini K47 microphones as overheads, and these are positioned about 4 foot away from the centre of the snare. This was what we had to work with. This is a pretty new studio, so we kept it basic and just used what Matt had available. As for my electronic kit, of course it's being powered by the Pearl Mimic Pro with a custom kit that I've built to be as close to this acoustic setup as possible. I'm using a DIY kick drum that I built myself that's 16x7. It just has a basic trigger inside and a foam cushion, and it's got a DrumTech Pro mesh head and an Evans EQ double patch on it. I've got a converted 13-inch Mapex snare, and that's got the Geardrum 3CS trigger inside. Again, there's a link in the description to the review that I did of this for anybody that wants to check that out, and there's a DrumTech Real Feel head on this. I've also got a Roland BT1 attached to give me a dedicated cross-stick pad. I've got a DIY rack tom that I built the trigger inside of. It's just a standard dual zone center cone setup with a Roland PowerPly 2-ply head on it, and then I'm using two Alesis strike pads as floor toms. I bought one as part of the expansion pack to try out some Alesis pads, but the center plate broke, so they sent me another one. So now I have two. There's a DrumTech Real Feel head on the one that I use for gigs and just the stock Alesis head on the second one. My cymbals are a big mismatch of brands. I'm using a Yamaha PCY135 for the hi-hat with a Go eDrum controller underneath, a Roland CY15R as my left crash, an ATV 18-inch ride for the ride, and an Alesis Strike ride pad as my 16-inch right-hand cymbal. Sometimes that's used as a second crash, but today it will be a China to mirror my acoustic kit. Okay, time to listen to them side by side with a track.